12 motorcycles, 12 machines that regulators, insurers, and sometimes the manufacturers themselves decided had gone too far. Not too slow, not too expensive, too dangerous. We are talking about bikes that triggered government investigations, forced global recalls before the first model year was even over, drove entire manufacturers into bankruptcy, and in at least 2 cases reshaped international law. One of them is responsible for the only informal speed treaty in motorcycle history. A handshake deal between competing nations to stop building motorcycles that were getting people killed simply by existing. The number 1 bike, governments on 2 continents threatened to ban it outright. Manufacturers panicked. The rider response was to buy 30,000 of them before the year was out. Stay to the end, because that story is more complicated and more damning than you have been told. Number 12. Suzuki TM400 Cyclone, 1971 through 1974. Most dangerous motorcycles that get discussed on channels like this are road bikes, the kind of thing you ride to work on a Tuesday and hopefully arrive in one piece. The Suzuki TM400 Cyclone was not that. It was a motocross bike, a dirt weapon aimed at experienced off-road competitors. And even those riders wanted nothing to do with it. That is a very bad sign. Suzuki built the TM400 around the same era that Japanese manufacturers were waging an all-out horsepower war, and the strategy apparently extended to the dirt segment too. The single-cylinder 2-stroke produced a power-to-weight ratio that was extraordinary for its day, but the power delivery was explosive rather than progressive. You were in the power band instantly, without warning. The frame was too light to handle the forces the engine was generating, and the suspension geometry made the bike actively hostile in corners. Period testers described the front end as washing out mid-turn at exactly the worst possible moment. Here is what they don't tell you in the brochure. The TM400 became so notorious that professional riders publicly refused to race one. Not declined, refused. Contemporary press coverage described experienced motocross competitors getting bucked off on routine practice laps. Number 11. Honda CX500 Turbo, 1982. Turbocharging a motorcycle sounds like the natural next step in performance engineering. Honda thought so too. The CX500 Turbo arrived in 1982, with electronic fuel injection at a time when most motorcycles were still running carburetors, bodywork that looked genuinely futuristic, and a claimed 82 horsepower from a liquid-cooled V-twin. On paper, legitimately cutting edge. The problem was physics. Turbo lag in a car means a slightly sluggish response and then a push into the seat. Turbo lag on a motorcycle leaning through a corner, that same delay followed by a sudden torque surge, can put you in the guardrail. Early owners reported exactly that. Honda tried to manage the boost curve electronically, but the technology of the era wasn't refined enough to do the job. Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki all followed within a year with their own turbocharged motorcycles. All of them failed commercially. All of them were discontinued within 3 years. Honda sold fewer than 3,000 CX500 turbos in the United States. Not banned by law, technically, just effectively banned by physics, and by the hard lesson that the rider's corner entry timing and a turbocharger's power delivery curve are fundamentally incompatible. Number 10. Laverda Jota 1000, 1976 through 1982. There is an Italian philosophy when it comes to machinery. If it doesn't hurt a little, you're not doing it right. The Laverda Jota 1000 took that philosophy and ran it off a cliff. This was a motorcycle whose British importer reportedly modified every unit before delivery to make it minimally road safe, describing the stock Italian specification as intended for track use. The importer said this about a bike he was selling for road use. The Jota was built around a triple-cylinder engine derived directly from Laverda's racing program, producing around 90 horsepower in an era when most performance motorcycles were making 60 or 70. The engine fired with a distinctive 180-degree crank arrangement that created an uneven firing pulse, one twin beat followed by a single, producing a sound that former owners describe as a cross between a race engine and a machine gun. What they're more reluctant to describe is the vibration. At sustained highway speeds, the Jota vibrated so severely that it would loosen its own fasteners. Owners developed a pre-ride ritual of torque checking every bolt. The gearbox was notoriously brutal. The brakes were adequate cold and unpredictable hot. The entire machine required the mechanical attention most people associate with maintaining a race bike between events, not commuting between cities. The Jota was discontinued in 1982 when regulatory pressure and practical impossibility of street use converged into the same decision. Number 9. Bimota V-Due, 1997. Bimota was, for a long time, the definition of an exclusive motorcycle manufacturer. Small volume, Italian-built machines with frames lighter and stiffer than anything the major factories were producing. Their prices reflected it. Then came the V-Due, which didn't just fail, it nearly ended the company entirely. Bimota decided to build their own engine for the first time. The concept was ambitious. A 500 cubic centimeter two-stroke twin with direct fuel injection, delivering race engine performance with modern emissions compliance. The technology was genuinely forward-thinking. The execution was catastrophic. When the first V-Due models reached customers in 1997, the problems were immediate. The direct injection system refused to function properly at cold temperatures. At operating temperature, it surged and cut out without warning. The engine would seize mid-corner with no warning and no opportunity for the rider to react. Several serious accidents followed. Bimota recalled every V-Due and bought them back from customers. The financial burden was fatal. A company that had survived on reputation had its reputation destroyed by a single model. Bimota filed for bankruptcy in 2001. Around 500 units were built. Fewer than 100 were ever made fully functional. The rest were essentially factory defects sold at supercar prices. The V-Due didn't get banned. It bankrupted the people who built it, which is arguably worse. Number 8. Kawasaki H1 Mach III 500, 1969 through 1975. Before we get to its even more dangerous big brother at number 7, we need to talk about the motorcycle that started Kawasaki's reputation for building bikes that could actively kill you. The H1 Mach III was a 500 cubic centimeter three-cylinder two-stroke that arrived in 1969 with a quarter-mile time of under 13 seconds for under $1,000. Motorcyclist magazine described its power-to-weight ratio as the best ever produced in a motorcycle meant to sell to anyone who had the money to purchase it. That is a compliment with a warning buried right in the center of it. Handling characteristics were, to put it charitably, not favorable. The double cradle steel frame flexed under load in ways the engineers had not fully anticipated and the test riders had apparently decided were acceptable. They were not. At speeds above 80 miles per hour, the front wheel had a documented tendency to oscillate, a tank slapper, meaning the handlebars snap violently side to side faster than a rider can physically correct. Insurance companies categorized the H1 separately from other motorcycles. Some refused coverage entirely. Contemporary riders who survived it describe hitting the power band in the lower gears as being launched rather than accelerated. Number 7. Kawasaki H2 Mach IV 750, 1972 through 1975. The Widowmaker. If there is one motorcycle the entire industry uses as the reference point for what not to build, this is it. The 748 cubic centimeter two-stroke triple produced 74 horsepower in a machine weighing approximately 190 kilograms. A power-to-weight ratio that was not just extreme for 1972, it was genuinely dangerous by any standard. The engineering problems were layered. The piston port intake design meant power delivery was binary, nothing below 5,000 revolutions per minute, then everything simultaneously above it. The weight was heavily rear-biased, which meant that when the power band hit in the lower gears, the front wheel came up regardless of rider intent. The double cradle steel frame lacked the torsional rigidity to manage 74 horsepower, and at speeds above 100 miles per hour it would flex, initiating a harmonic oscillation that riders who survived describe as the most terrifying experience of their motorcycling lives. Kawasaki fitted a friction-type steering damper and a mounting lug for a hydraulic unit, both admissions that the original design required external intervention to be survivable. By 1975, tightening emission standards and the accumulated weight of insurance rejections ended production. The Widowmaker was not formally banned. It was priced out of existence by the people who calculate the cost of dying. Collectors now pay serious money for clean examples. The irony writes itself. Number 6. Suzuki TL1000S, 1997 through 2001. The 1990s were the decade of the V-twin. Ducati had made the configuration fashionable through world superbike dominance, and every other major manufacturer wanted in. Suzuki's answer was the TL1000S, which arrived in 1997 with 125 horsepower, a genuinely innovative rotary rear damping system, and a chassis that the firm's European test riders had been warning about for months. Nobody listened to the testers. The rotary rear damper was the central problem. Instead of a conventional spring and shock setup, Suzuki used rotating arms through a fluid reservoir. Elegant in concept, disastrous in practice. The limited oil volume caused the fluid to overheat under sustained use, and overheated fluid loses viscosity, which means damping effectively disappears. When rear damping disappears on a leader-class V-twin with 125 horsepower, the rear end behaves autonomously. Tank slappers became documented, repeatable events. NHTSA Campaign ID 97V093 is the formal notation for what followed. After several high-profile accidents and one documented fatality in the United Kingdom, Suzuki issued a worldwide recall in 1997 to install a steering damper. For 1998 models, Suzuki quietly retarded the ignition timing in the lower 3 gears, reducing effective output from 123 horsepower to approximately 110. They did not describe this publicly as an admission that the original specification had been dangerous. A second recall in '98 addressed fuel tank gasket degradation. Number 5. MTT Y2K Turbine Superbike 2000 through present. Every motorcycle on this list was banned or effectively removed from service by physics, engineering failure, or regulatory pressure. The MTT Y2K Turbine Superbike occupies a different category. It was nearly impossible to register legally in most jurisdictions, not because it failed a safety standard, but because the standards had never anticipated anything like it. Marine Turbine Technologies built the Y2K around a Rolls-Royce Allison 250 series gas turbine, the kind used in helicopters, producing a claimed 320 horsepower at 52,000 RPM. Verified top speed exceeded 250 miles per hour. The exhaust temperature was high enough that Jay Leno, who owns serial number 002, noted the heat melted the plastic bumper of the car stopped behind him at a traffic light. That is not a performance specification. That is a safety hazard for bystanders during normal urban traffic. The noise alone disqualified it from most jurisdictions with sound ordinance enforcement. The emissions profile of a refurbished helicopter turbine running on diesel had no equivalent motorcycle emissions category because no regulatory body had ever written standards for a helicopter turbine on 2 wheels. Registering one required individual DMV determinations with no established precedent, varying by state. Motorcyclist John Burns described it as feeling like a bullet train under full power, with a complete absence of vibration. You hear the turbine but don't feel it, except for the sensation of your vertebrae being compressed. Price at launch: $175,000. Guinness listed it as both the most powerful and most expensive production motorcycle in the world. MTT continues to build them to order. The number of US jurisdictions where you can legally operate one without significant bureaucratic effort remains very small. Number 4. Brough Superior SS 100, 1924 through 1940. If you need a single data point to understand why the Brough Superior SS 100 belongs on this list, it is the motorcycle that resulted in the United Kingdom requiring riders to wear helmets by law. One bike, one crash, one famous rider. An entire nation's legislation changed permanently. George Brough built motorcycles in the 1920s and 30s that were custom-made for each buyer, and every SS 100 came with a factory certificate guaranteeing it had been timed at over 100 miles per hour before delivery. On roads that were largely unpaved, with braking technology that a modern bicycle would consider inadequate, and rubber compounds that bore no relationship to the grip levels of even budget modern tires. T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, owned 7 of them. The aftermath of Lawrence's death directly contributed to mandatory helmet legislation in the UK neurosurgeon Hugh Cairns, who treated Lawrence, produced the foundational government report in that process. Brough Superior halted production in 1940 due to wartime materials restrictions and never restarted in original form. A surviving SS-100 in good condition today commands prices exceeding £300,000 at auction. The history of why those machines exist only in collections tells you exactly what they were capable of doing to their riders. Number 3. Vincent Black Shadow, 1948 through 1955. Hunter S. Thompson wrote about the Vincent Black Shadow in a 1995 issue of Cycle World, and he was precise. If you rode the Black Shadow at top speed for any length of time, you would almost certainly die. He wasn't writing fiction. He was writing from the considered position of someone who understood the relationship between the motorcycle's capability and the infrastructure available to ride it on. The Vincent Black Shadow produced 150 horsepower from a 1,000 cubic centimeter V-twin in 1948. Consider, Yamaha's R1 produces approximately 150 horsepower in the 2026 model year. Vincent achieved the same number 78 years ago on a machine with drum brakes, a rigid rear frame, and tires that would be unsuitable for a modern budget bicycle. The verified top speed was 150 miles per hour. Verified, not claimed. Vincent ceased production in 1955, citing the impossibility of competing with Japanese manufacturers' price points. The real contributing factor was the growing impossibility of certifying the Black Shadow's performance in an era of increasing road regulation. The bike was simply too fast for the world it was being sold into. Approximately 700 examples survive. Those that go to auction routinely exceed £100,000. The Thompson quote now appears on merchandise. The fact that he wrote it as a genuine warning about imminent death somehow got entirely lost in the decades of retrospective celebration. Number 2. Suzuki Hayabusa, 1999 unrestricted. The 1999 Suzuki Hayabusa did not get banned. What it did was scare multiple national governments badly enough that they threatened to ban it, and that threat was credible enough that the entire Japanese motorcycle industry sat down and voluntarily agreed to stop the arms race it had started. That is a different kind of power. Suzuki's goal was explicit: build the fastest production motorcycle in the world. The 1,299 cubic centimeter inline 4 delivered 173 horsepower at the crankshaft, and sophisticated aerodynamics pushed the bike to 194 miles per hour in real-world Cycle World testing. That's not a top-speed claim from a press kit. That's a public road speed on a motorcycle a licensed rider could purchase over the counter. European regulatory response was immediate and serious. Active legislative movement in the EU targeted hard limits on motorcycle top speeds, not voluntary, the criminal penalties kind. Japan's major manufacturers read the political situation correctly and acted before the law could be written. The resulting gentleman's agreement, informal but industry-wide, capped production motorcycle top speeds at approximately 186 miles per hour. Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Yamaha all complied. Ducati later acknowledged the agreement explicitly, telling journalists that manufacturers had agreed pursuing top speeds was impractical and dangerous and had adopted different approaches to compliance. The Hayabusa's iconic 220 miles per hour speedometer was replaced on 2001 and later models with a unit stopping at 185. Suzuki, when asked directly by a journalist about the agreement, responded, "Most bikes are electronically limited to 186 miles per hour. Unfortunately, we don't have top speed figures to provide," which is manufacturer speak for yes. Number 1. Kawasaki Ninja H2R, 2015 track only. Every motorcycle on this list was built for the street and then removed from it, recalled, limited, or regulated into submission. The Kawasaki Ninja H2R arrived already banned, not banned through failure, not banned through scandal, banned by design, before the first unit shipped because Kawasaki built something they knew no government on earth would certify for public roads, and they didn't try. The H2R uses a supercharged 1,000 cubic centimeter inline 4 producing 321 horsepower. For context, that exceeds the output of a Dodge Challenger SRT Hellcat car. On 2 wheels, with a wet weight of approximately 216 kilograms. Confirmed top speed exceeds 248 miles per hour, limited not by engine capability, but by the speed rating of the available tire compounds. The aerodynamic downforce wings are structural, not decorative. Remove them at speed and the front end lifts. Kawasaki understood this and built the wings into the chassis design anyway, because the H2R was never going anywhere near a public road. Kawasaki did not attempt street certification. They built the H2R, classified it as a closed-course competition vehicle, and sold it at $50,000. In doing so, they found the only legal path to selling a motorcycle that the gentleman's agreement, the one the Hayabusa forced into existence, would otherwise prohibit. It's a track bike, so the agreement doesn't apply. No government banned it because no government had jurisdiction over it. Kawasaki didn't break the rules. They built something so extreme that the rules simply did not reach it. The full circle moment here is almost too clean. The Hayabusa at number 2 is the motorcycle that caused the gentleman's agreement. The H2R at number 1 is the motorcycle that found the legal loophole in it. The Hayabusa got electronically limited. The H2R got away. Both of them were engineered in Japan. Both of them proved that when manufacturers are sufficiently motivated, regulations are a problem with a solution. The only question is whether that solution involves a firmware update or a reclassification. In the history of motorcycles that were too dangerous to ride, the H2R is the only one that admitted it up front and sold it as a feature. Every machine on this list started as an engineering ambition, and ambition without mechanical discipline is just a liability claim waiting to be filed. If you want to understand what poor decisions do to a motorcycle slowly and quietly, check out my video on 10 everyday riding habits that slowly destroy your motorcycle. It's less dramatic than a widowmaker, but the damage is just as real.